The Book of Enoch says angels keep a book, and in that book every name that has ever lived is written down in order. And it says one of those names can be taken out. Sit with that for a second. Not a poem, not a comforting line about God remembering the good people. A record, a register kept current, like a ledger that never closes, every soul set down in its own row by a hand that does not forget. And if being written down is the thing that keeps you, then everything turns on one question. What is left behind when a single entry is removed? Read that line again, not as poetry, as a register. Before I go anywhere near that question, I want to put something in your hands, because I know how this sounds. When you hear angels in a book of names, your instinct is to file it under legend. Old story. Somebody's dream, dressed up. But this is not a lost legend. The Book of Enoch is a real book. You can hold a copy of it. Here is what makes it real. It was left out of most canons. That part is true, and it is just history, nothing hidden about it. But it was never lost. It stayed scripture in the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, read and copied for centuries in Ge'ez, the old church language of Ethiopia. Those manuscripts still exist. Pages of them sit under glass and under lamplight today. And then, in the caves above the Dead Sea, at Qumran, fragments of Enoch turned up among the Dead Sea Scrolls, in more copies than many of the books that did make it into the canon. Think about that. A book people call apocryphal was being copied, out there in the desert, more often than books we now call scripture. So this is not somebody's fantasy about the afterlife. When a text with that kind of weight behind it describes a heavenly ledger of names, the claim is not floating in the air. It is written on real pages, in a real language, kept by real hands across a real span of time. That changes how you read it. You cannot wave it off. You have to actually deal with what it says. So let me read you what it says. I want to start with chapter 81, because it is the plainest picture the book gives of the record itself. In chapter 81, Enoch is taken up and shown the tablets of heaven. And he is not just shown them. He is told to read them. He looks, and written on those tablets he sees every deed of every generation of men, all of it, set down. That is the text. He reads the tablets of heaven, and on them is the whole record of what people have done, generation after generation, already written. Hold that word, written. It comes back and it changes. Now let me be careful here, because this is where a reading can run ahead of the text, and I don't want to do that to you. I want to keep the line visible. This is what the book says, and this next part is what I think it means. What the book says is that the deeds are written. Here is what the structure of it suggests to me. This is not memory. When we say God remembers something, we usually mean he holds it in mind, soft and warm, the way you remember a face. But tablets you are told to read are not a mind. They are a surface with entries on it. Rows, a thing you check. The moment the text hands Enoch the tablets and tells him to read them out, memory stops being the right word. This is a register. And a register is something colder than remembering. It is kept current. It is consulted. It is accurate on purpose. And once you see it as a register instead of a memory, a very cold thought arrives on its own. A register is a thing that can be edited. A row can be filled. A row can be struck through. Which brings me back to the question I opened with, and I am going to leave it open for now, because the whole book is going to answer it slowly. If a name being written down is what keeps a soul, if to be entered is to be held, then what does the text say happens when a name is taken out? Not the deed. The name, the entry itself, lifted from the list. I am not going to reach for that answer yet, because chapter 81 does not give it. Chapter 81 only shows Enoch the tablets. It shows him the record sitting there, closed, complete, waiting. It never shows the moment the books are actually opened. It never shows them read aloud. It never shows a count being taken. But there is a chapter that does exactly that. A chapter where the books do not just sit, they open. where a tally is made, and the righteous are named, one by one, before the Lord of spirits, where the quiet tablets from chapter 81 turn into something that is checked and current and read out loud in front of a throne. That is chapter 47. And it takes this record, this book that never closes, and it makes it worse than a record. Chapter 47 is where the tablets stop sitting shut and get opened. The text says the books of the living are opened before the Lord of spirits, and the righteous are counted and named in them, not remembered, counted. A number is taken, which turns the quiet register from chapter 81 into something that is checked, current, and read aloud. Let me read what the chapter actually gives you. It speaks of the prayer of the righteous going up, of their blood risen from the earth before the Lord of spirits, and then it opens the books of the living opened, and in that moment the righteous are numbered, their names set before the throne, so the account can be settled. That is the scene, a great book laid open on the seat of judgment, and a hand moving down the list. Now, the mainstream reading softens this. It treats the books of the living as a poetic image, the same book of life you find later in canonical scripture, a way of saying God does not forget his own. That is a serious reading, held by serious people, and I want to be fair to it before I press on it. But read the chapter flat, the way it is written, and it is colder than a memory. It is a roll call. Think about what a roll call is. You open the book, you read the names, you take the total, then you close it again. That is not how you describe God's memory, which by definition holds everything at once. That is how you describe a register, something opened at a set time, read out and closed. A ledger that never closes for good, but is opened when the count is due. And here is the part I keep returning to. A count means someone can be missing from it. Sit with that. If the righteous are numbered, then the number is either complete or it is one short. A roll call only matters because a row can be empty. The moment you take a total, you have created the possibility of subtraction. So, the tablets in chapter 81 showed you the book exists. Chapter 47 shows you the book is used. It is opened, it is read, and a number is taken from it before the Lord of spirits. That is worse than a record. A record just sits there. This one gets checked, but a count still feels distant. It could be a bookkeeping detail of heaven, nothing to do with you. So let me turn to the chapter that closes that distance, because chapter 104 is where the writing stops being about accounting and starts being about what holds a soul in place. Chapter 104 is spoken to the righteous directly. It tells them to have hope, and then it tells them why. Their names, the text says, are written before the glory of the Great One, and it does not leave the writing as a comfort. It says this writing is what holds them. The names set down before the glory are the reason they are kept. Read that again, slowly. The writing is not a description of the soul. It is not a label attached after the fact. In chapter 104, the writing is the thing doing the holding. You are kept because you are written. Take away the writing, and you take away the thing keeping you in place. That is the reading this whole passage turns on. And I want to say it plainly. To be named is to be kept, not remembered fondly. Kept, held. The name on the page is fastened to the throne, and as long as it is fastened, the soul stays where it is. The book that never closes is not a scrapbook of who lived. It is the thing that holds the living in place. And once you see it that way, the whole record tilts, because now the writing has weight. Now it does something, and you start to feel your own name inside the count, which is exactly where the text wants you. Before the next passage, stop for a second. What you just heard only makes sense written out next to the text itself. The chapters, the cross-references, the translated wording of chapter 47 and chapter 104 side by side. I put all of it into a written document. It is linked below, and the QR code is on your screen. Grab it Come back, because what follows builds directly on it. Because here is the question the whole thing now presses on. If being written is being held, then a name removed is not a small edit. It is not a correction in the margin. It is the removal of the exact thing that held a soul in place. Unfasten the name, and you have not changed a record. You have let go of the person the record was holding. The text has told you, the writing keeps you. It has not yet told you what happens when the writing is taken away. And that gap is the whole reason I read this book the way I do, because Enoch does not leave it as a gap. There are verses about a name taken out. The book actually describes it. So I go looking for the other verses, the ones about a name taken out. The book describes names blotted from the record at judgment, a line struck through, an entry that once was and is not burned, removed from the list. And when I read the Ge'ez word for this writing, the word behind the holding, the word behind the name set down before the glory, the whole thing tilts, because that word does not only mean to record, it carries something else underneath it, something that changes what an erased name really is. And that is where the wording stops being ordinary. It does not only mean to record. Hold that for a moment, because I want to read the erasure straight first, before I touch the language. The book describes names blotted from the record at judgment. That is the phrase the text keeps returning to. A name that was in the list, and then is not. Removed from the list, not destroyed in fire. There is no pit here, no burning, no chain in a valley. There is a line, and there is a hand, and the line is struck through. An entry that once was and is not. Read it as a scribe would. A ledger is open. A row is filled. Then, at the reckoning, a stroke of ink crosses that row out. The count does not stop. It moves on to the next name, and the next, and the row that was crossed out is simply passed over, as if it were never filled. That is what unsettles me every time I come back to it. The horror is not violence. The horror is how quiet it is. A soul that was counted, and then the counting goes past it without a pause. Now, before I press on this, I want to give the ordinary reading its full weight, because it is held by serious people, and it deserves that. The mainstream church reading treats the book of life as canonical scripture. It appears in the Psalms, in Exodus, in the Revelation of John. And in that reading, the Book of Enoch is an early echo of it, a voice from the same world of images. The record on this reading is poetry about God's memory. To be written in the book is to be remembered by God. To be blotted out is a way of saying God's favor has turned. It is language about the divine mind, not a literal cabinet of scrolls. That is a fair reading. I have sat with it for years, and I do not think it is foolish. If you read Enoch this way, you are in good and careful company. But then I go to the Ge'ez, and this is where I stop being able to leave it alone. The word the text uses for this writing, this setting down of a name, does not only mean to record. Its root carries another sense underneath it, the sense of binding, of fastening something so that it stays, tying a thing down so it cannot drift. In the oldest layer of the word, to write a name into this book is not merely to note it. It is to fix it in place. The word in the Ge'ez is not the word for punishment. Read it again. It is the word for holding. So, let me put the two halves together, and let me be clear that from here I am reading, not quoting. A name written is a name fastened. That is what the root implies. The writing is not a description of the soul. The writing is the thing that keeps the soul in place, and if that is true, then the line struck through is not what I assumed it was. Because here is what the title asked, and here is the answer the wording gives. An erased name is not forgotten. It is unfastened, let go, released from the thing that held it in place. That is the payoff, and I want to say it plainly, because it took me a long time to see it. The text does not say the erased soul is punished. It does not send it anywhere. It says it is no longer held. The stroke of ink does not destroy the row. It unties it. Sit with the difference. To be punished is to still be counted, still be in the book, still be an entry the record is doing something to. To be unfastened is worse and stranger than that. It is to be let go by the only thing that was keeping you fixed, not thrown down, untethered. The hand that set the name down does not forget it. The hand releases it. That is the coldest thing in the whole book, and it is also, somehow, the quietest. So, let me step back from the list of chapters and say what I think the whole record claims, taken together. And this is my reading now, marked as mine. Someone who wrote this believed that existence itself is an entry in a book, that to be named is to be kept, that you are not held in place by fire or by your own strength or by memory, but by a line of writing in a ledger that never closes, and that the worst thing that can happen to you in this cosmos is not judgment. It is not the pit. It is subtraction. Being taken off the list, having the row that was you cross through so the count moves past, that is a very old fear and a very precise one. It is the fear of being unwritten. And here is what I keep coming back to, the thing I cannot get past. Someone counted the names. Someone sat with this idea long enough to record that a name could be set down by a hand that does not forget. And then that same person wrote down that a name could also be taken out. They did not soften it. They did not hide it. They wrote the erasure into the book itself, a line about the striking through of lines. And then they left the page. They left it open, in Ge'ez, on manuscript pages that outlived every empire that tried to bury them, so that you and I could sit here all this time later and read that one could be erased. They left the page where we can still read it. Before I close, I want to hear from you. Tell me which passage sits heaviest with you. The tablets of heaven in chapter 81, the count opened before the Lord of Spirits in 47, the names written before the glory in 104, or the line struck through. Say the chapter in the comments. I read them. And the next reading follows this one directly, because Enoch does not stop at the Book of Names. It tells you who first taught men to write things down at all, and the text says it was not a man. We open that page next,